But let's start off today talking about financial psychology. And, in my practice, I've been doing it for almost 40 years. Nothing makes people crazier than money. Not love, politics, religion. Nothing makes people more nuts than money. Trust me on this one. Absolutely true. The smartest, most level-headed people that you'll ever meet can become totally irrational when money is involved. And financial psychology drives the way we deal with money, how we invest, how we handle our investments, how we sleep at night. And it's important to understand our financial psychology so we understand what the positives and the negatives we have in our psychology that affects our money. So in my book, The Financial Physician, How to Cure Your Money Problems and Boost Your Financial Health, available free of charge on my website. Just go to thefinancialphysician.com. A beautiful PDF comes down. It's really, really nice. Right? It's really, really formatted really, really well. Available free of charge. Just give us your email, get on our email list, and you could download the PDF of the book. And chapter 5 of my book, I dedicated to understanding your financial psychology. And I think this is one of the most important chapters in the book. Because again, our mind drives everything, our feelings. Now, most people fall into one or two financial psychologies. All right? And I call it attitudes, financial attitude. Do you have an attitude of lack? Or do you have an attitude of abundance? It's one or the other. And frankly, it has nothing to do with how much money you have. What's the difference? Well, an attitude of abundance, you believe that you'll always have what you need to support your family, to support yourself, that the world is full of opportunities, God will take care of me, and I don't have to worry about anything. That's a great attitude to have. As long as it's true that you will be okay and you're not diluting yourself. And it's a less stressful attitude. These people rarely complain about their finances. They live comfortable lives. They're generous. And they seem to feel that everything's going to be fine. And they'll get what they need. Now, the other side of that, which I think is the majority of us, we have an attitude of lack. We believe that we may not be able to get everything we need to survive. We're always concerned. We just won't have enough. We're concerned about running out of money. These kind of people tend to be very frugal, tightwads, if you will. Compulsive savers. They don't invest because they're always worried that they may lose some money. Now, most of us who have that attitude of lack grew up in difficult financial conditions. That's where our impression was formed, was when we were young. If you grew up in a family that struggled, then later on in life, you're going to still have that same feelings of lack, no matter how much money you have. And I'm a prime example of that. I don't come from money. I was the oldest of 6 kids. My dad was a union printer in New York. My mother was a waitress. And we didn't have 2 nickels to rub together, trust me. My parents did the best they could. We always had food on the table, but they struggled. In the mid-'70s, those old enough to remember that, we went through a bad recession. And my dad was out of work for 3 years. We were on welfare, got free lunches at school. Thankfully, we did get by. I don't know how they did it, but they did it. I remember going to the food store, my dad doing the weekly grocery shopping and him using credit cards to pay for it. So these things are indelible in my mind. And I'd say the biggest thing that always stayed on my mind was getting a free lunch in high school. The stigma of it. I would go without eating lunch many days because I didn't want to have anybody see me take that little ticket that they gave you to pay for your lunch. To me, it was totally embarrassing. And I would go without food That's how I felt about it. Talk about getting an attitude of lack ingrained in your brain, right? On one hand, it was very motivating for me. I promised myself that my children would never get a free lunch in school, no matter what I had to do. And it motivated me to go to college and motivated me to be successful. And maybe that was a good thing. But the attitude of lack never really went away. Early on, when I started to get successful, I started bringing up a family, I still had the attitude of lack. I was afraid to spend money. I was somewhat cheap. When really, in reality, I didn't have to be. And it took a long time for me to overcome that attitude of lack. And I since have done that. Now, the one thing you got to realize about an attitude of abundance or an attitude of lack, it has nothing to do with how much money you have. Surprisingly, right? You would think people with a lot of money would feel an attitude of abundance. No, because it's a psychological thing. It's rational to say, okay, I put away $1 million. I'm in good shape. I don't have to worry about money. That's rational. But again, people are irrational when it comes to money. I have a client she's 80-something years old, in the high 80s. Has, I don't know, close to $2 million with me. I don't know what the exact number is. But every 3 or 4 months, I have to walk her off the ledge. She has to come in, and I have to hold her hand because she believes and worries that she will be destitute. Could you imagine that? She doesn't hardly spend any money. Almost $2 million. And she can't sleep at night. Boy, that's an attitude of lack, isn't it? Has nothing to do with how much money you have. And the same is true of an attitude of abundance. I have clients that have less than $100,000 with me. They never worry about money. First one to pick up the check, give charity all the time. And again, it doesn't correlate to how much we have. They're financial states of mind. Think about it yourself. Do you have an attitude of lack or do you have an attitude of abundance? It drives everything in your life. And it's those who have the attitude of abundance tend to invest rather than save. Those with an attitude of lack tend to save instead of invest because you can't take any risk of losing anything, you see? People with attitude of abundance, they're not looking for guaranteed or safe investments. They're more prone to take risks because even if they do, and if they go backwards a little bit, so what? They'll come back. And if you have an attitude of abundance, you usually live a better and a lifestyle and a more fulfilled life. You're not afraid to spend money on things that make life good. You don't waste much time worrying about the stock market or your mortgage or money in general. And people with an attitude of lack, they equate money with security. And that's another psychological. Money is not security. It's not. Now look, I'd rather have it than not and feel financially secure, but it really isn't. And money is nothing until it's spent. Think about it. It's just potentiality, money. So if you have, and I use this example all the time, and in my practice, I tell you, the hardest thing I have to do with my clients, especially my older clients, is let them understand that the money they've accumulated over their lives is for their retirement and should be spent. Not just the interest it earns, not just the growth of it, all of it. But psychologically, it's tough for people to say, hey, my whole life I've been building net worth. I've been saving. I've been growing my money. Now to go the other way is problematic psychologically to most people. If I've accumulated $1 million, I don't want to go below $1 million. If I go to 980, I want to jump off the roof. And you feel like you're in a tailspin. Oh no, what if I run out of money? I like to do an exercise with people. A lot of what I do as a financial planner is not money management. That's the easy part. What I do is financial therapy. is to deal with people's heads, try to get them to understand what money is, what it isn't. So when people come to me and say, Lou, I'm really concerned I'm going to run out of money, I say, all right, well, look, you're taking out $20,000 a year. That's what you're living off of. You have $400,000 in an investment portfolio. Let's assume that you're never going to earn anything on that $400,000. You're going to get a zero rate of return. And it's going to be in a shoebox under your bed. $400,000, a pretty big shoebox, I guess. And every year you're going to take out 20 grand. How long will that money last? Well, 400,000 divided by 20,000, 20 years. And if you're 72 years old, 20 years is going to make you 92. And you're not going to get a zero return on your money. So therefore, it'll last longer than you will. So I like to do that exercise with clients and potential clients to make them know that they're going to be okay. It's to stop worrying about money. But the problem we have is that people don't want to spend the money that they've accumulated. So your whole life you're saving money, and if somebody asked you, what are you socking money in your 401k for? What's the answer? Retirement, right? So why won't you use it in retirement? Do you see how irrational that is? Now, once you hit retirement, there's three paths you can take with your money. Assuming you've accumulated some, we'll talk about how many older Americans are in real big trouble right now. But assuming you accumulated a nest egg, right? And the big day comes, you finally retire, you have three paths you can take. The first path, and it's one that minority of people take, is they don't want to touch the money. They just want it to continue to grow because they like to count their shekels, and my net worth has gone up every year. I want it to continue to do that. That's silly. It's irrational. It's not what the money is there for. But the majority of people come to me and say, Lou, here's my $500,000 nest egg. Just give me what it could earn over time, and I'd like my $500,000 to be worth $500,000 5 years from now. And I'll answer them why. And it's hard for them to answer me because it makes them feel good. I don't want to go into the principal. That'll make me crazy. I'll start worrying that I'm going to run out of money. But again, the money was saved for retirement. And I use an analogy in the book. I say, think of it the squirrel. The squirrel accumulates their acorns. All fall, right? And they put them in their nest. Let's call it their nest egg. How about that? All right? Just like we do. Our whole lives we accumulate money in our 401ks, our IRAs, our savings, or whatever. But when the time comes, the squirrel eats the acorns in the winter. All of them. But we don't want to eat our acorns. We don't want to use our nest egg. The key here, though, is to just figure out easy computation that a financial planner or accountant can make. Take an assumed rate of return in a diversified portfolio. And some people say to me, Lou, I want you to plan for 22 years. I'm 70 now, 92. I don't expect to be here. If I am, I'll deal with it then. But I like to go to zero in my money then. How much could I take out a month with an assumed rate of return that'll last 22 years? We can make that calculation. Now, it's not going to be exact because the assumed rate of return may be higher or lower and has to be adjusted. But some clients come to me and say, Lou, if the day the last one of us die, me and my wife, there's a nickel left in our account, we did it right. I don't care about inheritance for my kids. My kids are making more money than I ever did at this stage of my life. They don't need my money. Now, if inheritance is really important to you, for many people it is, for different reasons, and I ascertain that early in the first appointment with clients, how important is inheritance to you? That's exactly the way I ask the question. And I'm very curious to hear the answer. Sometimes, I like to leave my kids something. But I'm not going to harm myself to do that. You know, I'm going to live my life, and whatever's left is left, and I'll get it. Other people say, oh, Lou, I want the majority of this money to go to my kids. They're struggling. This is going to make a difference. This is their retirement plan. As I mentioned in the past, for many baby boomers now retiring, especially those retiring with debt, their retirement plan is inheritance from their parents who don't spend their retirement money. And I always tell my clients, is this money for your retirement or your kids' retirement? You worked your whole lives to save for your kids' retirement? That doesn't sound right. But for many parents, that's the way they look at it. Or maybe you have a special needs child that you have to have money set aside for. Okay, I get it. I understand that. Then we got to think a little differently in how we spend our money. So again, psychology drives a lot of this stuff. And a lot of the groundwork for the attitudes that we have about money happens in childhood. We're strongly influenced by our parents' attitude about money. Well, they always worried. And early in my career, I found that Depression-era children that were still alive, I mean, I've been in this business 40 years, so they were alive at that time. And they have different attitudes about money than other people do. They've lived through very, very difficult times. So let's talk about the subsets, all right? And I've personally had consultations with, I've lost count, but probably a couple of thousand people over the course of my career. So people fall into certain categories. First, it's the state of mind they have, attitude of lack, attitude of abundance. I can tell that right within 5 minutes of talking with clients, where they come in at. It's very, very easy. Especially when you've been doing it as long as I have. I can tell very, very quickly the attitude. And sometimes the husband's attitude may be different than the wife's attitude. That's a real big problem. The wife has an attitude of abundance and wants to spend like crazy, and the husband has an attitude of lack and wants to squirrel his money away. That's a marriage that may not last. But a lot of times I could disdain that one spouse feels a certain way about money and the other spouse doesn't. Sometimes one spouse is very conservative, the other spouse is very aggressive. But our psychology, when it comes to money, affects how we invest. Let's talk about the five most common profiles, if you will, psychological profiles. See where you fit. The first person we see is the high roller. He thinks that everything in life is a gamble. He wants big returns in the stock market. He's willing to use high-risk strategies, always looking to hit the jackpot. A gambler, the high roller. Not only does he gamble in casinos, he gambles with his investments. This kind of person gets bored with conservative long-term investments and would rather speculate on commodities and individual stocks and real estate. That's what turns that person on. And they may have tremendous success if they're lucky. I mean, gamblers have to get lucky, right? And some of them do. But many of them lack diversification and wind up failing. The second profile, and this is a really dangerous one, is the abdicator. This person has little or no interest in managing money. And frequently it's women, older women who know nothing about investments. And it also includes men too at times. I don't want to be sexist on this, but I'm talking about older families, in their 70s and 80s. It was usually the husband that handled all the money, the investments and everything else. Never trained their wife in money management. And then he passes away. And now she's left alone to manage her money, to invest money, what have you, and she's a victim. She's easily taken advantage of. So the abdicator prefers someone else to manage their money and will usually do anything that a financial advisor suggests. They're very trusting because they don't know anything, so this person knows more than I do, so I better take their advice. They're surprised when they lose money. They couldn't believe it. And like I said, they're frequently taken advantage of by unscrupulous characters. Oh, and by the way, in the financial services industries, there are many unscrupulous characters. Trust me. That are only in it for one reason: not to help you manage your money, but to take your money and invest it where they get a big commission. And then you're dead to them. So an abdicator is probably one of the more dangerous profiles that we see. And usually older widowed women are the abdicators. The next one is another dangerous one, and that's the credit junkie. This person's addicted to acquiring things rather than building their wealth. And they're usually in denial about their addictive spending. They tend to carry big credit card balances. They're always driving nice cars, with large loans on them, by the way. And since much of their income goes into debt payments, they have little savings or net worth. And they wonder why it's so hard to get ahead. Why they sabotage themselves through needless, compulsive spending. I had a client who was addicted to QVC. The person late at night just would go on buying bitches. And sometimes wouldn't sleep till 4 or 5 in the morning. I mean, this is obviously a compulsive psychological problem that this person would have. And if with that went tremendous credit card balances. You don't want to be a credit junkie. But most Americans, that's exactly what they are. They always have car payments. They buy more house than they could afford. They have credit cards, student loans, and much of their income goes to debt service, as opposed to going to savings and investing. A lot of people, what's the trick of accumulating $1 million for retirement? Spend less than you make. Wow, that's a novel approach. Save. Don't spend every dime you have on car payments and home payments and credit card payments. The next profile, which is the best profile, is the money master. This is like a fitness freak who spends all of their time in the gym. This person is obsessed with money management. They're usually well educated in all money-related matters. They tend to avoid other people's advice, and they take full control of their own investments. They're very good at employing risk control, so they never get terribly hurt. But they're not fearful of investing money in a diversified investment portfolio. They're not afraid at all. The money master usually reaches his or her financial goals, but also enjoys his money success. And that's the key to being a money master, is enjoying the money that you've worked so hard to accumulate. And the money master lives an abundant but balanced lifestyle and is very happy and tends to have the attitude of abundance because they do have abundance. Very few people are money masters. I don't see many of them because they wouldn't come to me. They're a money master. They don't want to take other people's advice. But I've seen that type many times. And we don't really work very well together because they know better than me. Now lastly, and this one's kind of dangerous too, but in a different kind of way, and that's the squirrel. Many people are squirrels. They are savers who are as conservative as they come. They don't overspend. They live frugally. Squirrels usually have an attitude of lack because they fear they're never going to have enough money. Usually almost all their money is in banks or treasury bills where there's no risk. And they're willing to get low returns because they find the stock market way too risky. And they're deathly afraid of losses. But this is the key. Because they get such low rates of return, especially in the last 10 or 12 years where we've had zero interest rates, they have trouble keeping pace with inflation. Now in the book, I use an example of a squirrel. And I'll never forget these people. They came to me to review their financial situation. And they were both 67 years old. They had no children or close relatives. So the husband was a mechanic. He earned about $45,000 a year, and the wife worked in a factory, earning about $28,000 a year. So they weren't earning tons of money, but they worked. They owned, and now this happened 15, 20 years ago, so you have to go back in time a little bit. And I'll never forget them. They owned a $120,000 home, and they kept the thermostat at 65 degrees to save money. They only had one car. It was an 8-year-old Honda. So the wife walked about a mile to and from work each day. And 3 years prior to me seeing these people, the husband had triple bypass surgery. So he wasn't the healthiest guy in the world. So in looking under the hood of their savings, they've accumulated $3.5 million. That's 20 years ago in savings and investments. How did they do that on very low income? They squirreled all of it away and lived like they were poor. And when I asked them, why do you continue to work when you have so much money? And they said that they were afraid they had not saved enough to retire. Boy, that's an attitude of lack. That's an example of an attitude of lack, isn't it? And I remember the husband had, his clothes looked like he was a bum. He had a belt on that must have been 40 years old. It was bleached, it was frayed, this guy's a multimillionaire. So I drew them a picture, and I'll never forget this analogy I gave them. And it's in my book. I asked them to imagine that they lived on a large, beautiful lake. And each morning they'd go down to the lake, they'd fill their glasses with water from the lake. It was clean water. And they would drink the water. And they knew that they needed water to live. But after they drank their water, they would go to the garage, get an 8-foot pole, hang a basket on each end, put the pole across the husband's shoulders, and for the next 4 hours they would climb a mountain to a well where they'd fill up the buckets. Then they would hike down the mountain with the heavy buckets on his shoulder, which took another 3 hours. At the bottom, they would take the buckets and they'd pour the water into the lake, even though the lake contained more water than they could ever drink. And the wife looked at me like, her eyes were open finally. So when I was finished with this little analogy, she said, I never fully understood my attitude about money until right now, she said. And she said that after that analogy, she would consider retiring and taking it easy. 2 years later, they were both still working and saving every dime. So it made no difference, because that's how powerful attitudes like this are. And the way we relate to money is a learned thing, and it's hard to change. It's sad when I see people with a lot of money not spending it and living like they're poor. It just drives me crazy. It's a sin, in my opinion. And again, I call myself a financial therapist because so much of my job involves helping clients work through their financial concerns and the things that make them tick. And try to teach them what money is and what it isn't. So and there's a difference between being wealthy and rich. Well, I thought they were one and the same, you may say. No, they're not. Wealth, or being wealthy, is how much assets you have on a piece of paper, in a brokerage account, in a savings account, in your safe. That's your wealth, your home. Being rich is your lifestyle. So you could be wealthy and have 7 figures on a piece of paper that you die with. Yeah, you were a wealthy person, but you weren't a rich one because you lived like you were poor. Make sure you understand the difference between wealth and being rich. a rich lifestyle. Now, I'm not trying to tell people that can't afford to blow your money and be in trouble. Don't get me wrong. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm saying if you got it, don't be afraid to spend it on the quality of life that you deserve after working your whole life. So what is wealth to you? It's different to everybody. Is it the quality of food that you eat? Some people will say, my wife and I, we go out to eat twice a week. We love going out to eat. That's what makes us happy. Is wealth to you enjoying time with family and friends? I'm glad I have money because I can fly down to Florida 3 or 4 times a year and see my grandkids. That's what makes me feel good. The fact that you give to charity. Is that what wealth is to you? Travel. Me and my wife, we love to travel, right? In retirement, we're going to travel a lot. To me, that's what makes me happy. That's what makes me feel abundant. That's the quality of life I want in retirement. I had a client in my office a couple of months ago. He was 93 years old. He had a second marriage or late marriage. She was in her 70s. And in looking at his portfolio, he had $4.5 million in stocks and bonds. And I said, wow, you built up quite a portfolio. I'm very impressed. And his wife said to him, Lou, he has never once taken $1 out of that account. I was like, really? Why not? Because he is a miser. He is a person that loves to accumulate wealth. And we see this a lot with very older ethnic people. They just learned their whole lives to just put money away, never touch it, never spend it. He was wealthy, but not rich, that's for sure. He wasn't living a rich lifestyle. So it's important to understand. It's not easy to change. It's really important that you understand what your psychology is. Do you have an attitude of lack? Do you have an attitude of abundance? Which of the 5 profiles are you? Are you a gambler? Are you a high roller? Are you an abdicator that does whatever everybody else tells you to do? Are you a spendaholic, a credit junkie? Are you a squirrel that's so afraid of not having anything that you squirrel all your money away and don't live a good life and don't get a good return on your money? Or are you the money master who's mastered all these things? That understands investments have risk, that you employ risk controls, you're not fearful of investing money or spending money, and living an abundant and balanced lifestyle. Financial success very, very often has a lot to do with our financial psychology. Very important to understand that, and I have a whole chapter on that in the book, The Financial Physician, How to Cure Your Money Problems, Boost Your Financial Health. Available free to you. Download it at thefinancialphysician.com. All right, time for a break. If you want to be part of the program, you have a financial question or something I can help you with, or you just want to chime in, 732-237-9626 is the call number. My name's Lou Scatigna. You're listening to The Financial Physician. Don't go away.